Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A that you can't find anywhere else. It's February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We are a DevOps accelerator for funded startups that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. We do this by leveraging our over 200 Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 100 million times. No matter where you find yourself on this journey, we are here to help your startup launch better products faster so you can free up your bandwidth for innovation and nail your value delivery every time. So if you or your team has been banging your head against the wall with underperforming infrastructure, I encourage you to head over to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and you'll book a call with me directly. We'll go over your situation. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is very informal. Engage as much as you'd like, ask questions. And if you're curious about our open source tools or modules, go for it. For those on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Join us live by going to cloudposse.com/officehours and register. So I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's office hours valuable, go ahead and share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse, and find the video there. Or send us a short testimonial maybe about the value you're getting. You can comment in the videos, or you can post it in our Slack channel. Join us on Slack by going to slack.cloudposse.com. Remember, we are not just creating content here. We are building a community, and I can't do that. We can't do that without you. So let's get started with the news. All right, lots of things here, some bigger and some smaller. One was an exciting change, something I was really peeved about when HashiCorp Terraform deprecated their provider for doing template strings. We, in fact, manage our own fork of that provider just so we can keep doing that. It's a very nice way to keep your modules reusable where you have parameters that are ultimately strings. So there's a PR that's received some traction here in OpenTofu. It's being reviewed by core contributors here of OpenTofu. So I bet this is coming to OpenTofu. And guess what that means? Divergence. So this is the kind of thing that's going to really test, what we do here in the Terraform ecosystem. I wish we could find a way for OpenTofu and Terraform to coexist, at least in a way that benefits the user. Look, HashiCorp isn't going to get any props for complaints for users when they don't support things that OpenTofu does, vice versa. But maybe there can be now a compatibility flag, like when you require modules, you can maybe require certain flavors of HCL. I think something like that needs to be introduced for the vendors themselves. Like, how many times is HashiCorp going to have to now answer questions? Why the hell is this not working? Or where is this, right? So, anybody have thoughts on that?
I think from the time that we announced it, or that it was announced that OpenTofu was coming, and one of the goals was to maintain compatibility. I think I was, the immediate thing that came out of my mouth was that that's not going to last for very long. And I think we should just, we're having a desire that somehow it's going to be, still work past the first time that they diverge, I think is a pipe dream. And we're going to very shortly have people having to make a decision which functionality is more important to them, and which version or which fork, basically the main one or the fork that they're going to continue to use from. So I think this is just the first minor thing, but there's going to be lots of major things coming right after it that that make it impossible to have compatibility between the two.
I agree. Matt, I saw you come on video. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's inevitable. It was going to happen. It's funny that it's happening sooner rather than later. I kind of, I'm fine with it. I don't think it's not like we're going to see people like jockeying back and forth unless OpenTofu drops the ball in terms of stability and reliability. So I think that the only thing that we need that OpenTofu needs to do is just be reliable. And, hey, you cannot use this function, or you cannot use the subset of features that diverge if you are concerned about that reliability, for a certain amount of time after you switch. But I think that it is inevitable. It is gonna, happen because they're trying to be more, feature and more open to the community's requests. And there's really, I don't know, we shouldn't be surprised. It'll be interesting to see how, if it does end up being that some people, run into a lot of issues because of this type of divergence. But I really think it's going to be a one-way stream of, switching, and then there isn't really a switch back. I can't see you have less options if you switch back. So unless Terraform Cloud like changes their pricing model, it just doesn't seem like that would be a common operation.
Yeah, I think this is. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say, like, internally speaking, we use a couple of different terms. Like one is one is either like a reversible decision, or a walking through a one-way door, or those types of things. So I think this is one of the
decisions.
I think this is one of those ones. Like once you've walked through the door, it's going to lock behind you, and you can't walk back through it. So you've made a decision, like, or you're going to rewrite a whole bunch of your code, potentially over time. So consider carefully before, once this happens, which path you want to follow. That's my advice.
So hearing you guys talk, I hate to say it, but we've seen this before, right? And this is JavaScript, and this is the implementation of JavaScript in every major browser. And man, was AWS like, what's the word? Like, did they have just this tremendous foresight when they developed CDKTF? That CDKTF was going to be the requirement to use Terraform, kind of it, at scale across, OpenTofu or HashiCorp licensed Terraform, because that code generation is ultimately the way that gets solved. So you have portable versions of this for either version. So when
you're scaring me.
Template, I'm scaring myself. I don't want to see this. I really don't. But similarly for Sass for CSS, because just trying to write scalable CSS effectively was impossible without Sass. So template string, there's a provider for it. I could see you could have translations like, if you see this, then do that, and if you're using OpenTF, then use this function. But what a nightmare.
Yeah, just as long as we don't end up in like the build pack or web pack for Terraform, was that what it was called? Whatever the like horrible build processes that ended up being the de facto thing to do starting 10 years ago or whenever. And I don't think it's going to be problems like this. I think it's going to be problems that are in Terraform that diverge from Tofu that end up making it where you upgrade or you transition off Terraform, and that becomes the now I actually need to do work to migrate. That's going to be a problem. And I think that they're going to need to, Tofu should try and stay as in line with the existing syntax as they can for as long as they can to make that migration easier. But we'll see how they do.
Yeah.
If I Oh, go ahead, Eric.
This is good. Really briefly, when we talked about this, like, is it time to switch to OpenTofu a few weeks ago? There was a Reddit thread we brought up. I think this brings up this thing though, like if you try and maintain compatibility, there's limited differentiation to justify switching. If you create differentiation, now there's I mean, you kind of just got to draw a line. You can't play both sides, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You can't hedge.
Yeah.
I was gonna more refine your analogy there, and I think that OpenTofu is the node to the the Google V8 engine that runs in all the browsers, right? So it's kind of the core piece, plus they're going to add on like all this other stuff, and then so there are APIs that only run in Node, even though it's written in JavaScript. And I think that's kind of where we're going right now with this. And then it's going to continue to iterate, right? So they'll at some point they'll add things back to the core of it, and then they can pull out their customizations or the way that they customized it or whatever. But I think we've got a clear fork where code is going to run on one or the other, but not both, very shortly in the future right now.
All right.
All I know is if I see anyone doing checks in HashiCorp stuff or in Terraform to see if the user's running Internet Explorer and then branching, I'm going to just throw the whole thing out the window.
Yeah. Oh man, and writing conditionals in Terraform, yeah, those get gnarly.
Yeah.
All right. Next announcement was brought up by a customer of ours. So the customer was using Telepresence for the last like 4 years or so. It's been really awesome for them as part of their Kubernetes local development strategy. So with Telepresence, you can run pods in the cluster, but access them locally in your development environment as though they're native. I might have that backwards. They run natively on your machine, and then they appear in the cluster as local there. I got that backwards. Anyways, they, like many open source companies, I guess, felt a pressure to change what they offer in the open source version, or at least the public version. And that limits the number of ports you can now have in your services. So if in their case, every single service has a minimum of 2 ports, well, now they can't use it anymore. So they had to abort upgrading to V2 of Telepresence. They found this Migrate, and it looks like a alternative. I don't know it hasn't been finalized, but I wasn't aware of the project, so I thought I would share it. It apparently meets a lot of the same or requirements, or provides a lot of the same features of Telepresence without the limitations on ports.
Yeah, it's basically like ngrok for Kubernetes clusters.
Okay, cool.
Right, like the idea is that you can expose your local service into the cluster, and then interject it. So this is the answer to how do I, if I'm at an organization that has hundreds or thousands of microservices, and they are necessary, they communicate with one another and do all these things. How can I work on just one and test just one with like real traffic or with canary-based traffic to make sure that my changes are going to work? This is basically how you do it. You run the one version that's under development. You kind of expose it to the cluster. And then everything else works as expected, like on the actual cluster itself. So it's an interesting paradigm, and how some very large organizations that I've worked with have done it before. But I've never used this particular product, but I've seen the concept used a lot of places.
Yeah. Anybody seen or used Migrate? Okay. Moving on. This was good news. Cloudflare, they're just slaying these patent trolls, and it's nice to be on their side. Sable was another one of these that had gone after tons of providers based on how they do routing, trying to collect money. So Cloudflare not only beat them, they were able to get most of their patents reversed, like that they should have never been issued in the first place. So that's the kind of total destruction we want to see from these trolls that have not made a single invention. They're just sitting on inventions and trying to cash out. So also kind of cool is this project Django that they started, which I don't know why it's not opening here for me. There it is, which is a crowdsourcing platform for finding prior art to help invalidate patents that are, just invalid. So, I think there's a time and place for patents, and they're needed to encourage innovation, but I think they're also used abusively. Here's one. This is not new news, but it was news to me, so it might be news to others. I didn't know .gov was transferred from Verisign to Cloudflare, so that's interesting. And I was curious if anyone knows the backstory there. Is it a loss of confidence in Verisign? Is it, cost?
I looked it up based on your headlines at the start of this meeting. It looks like there was they did an RFP, and I think they just won the RFP. I didn't realize there was an RFP for it. I actually thought they self-managed it.
I would have thought so too. Yeah. It's interesting.
So I think it was basically just a contract that they won, and maybe in some number of years it'll change hands again.
Yeah. I wonder how often the others are up for renewal.
Also worth noting, it's a $7.2 million contract, assuming I read it correctly. So that's a lot for DNS.
7.2 million?
Yeah.
Or...
Yeah. I'm not sure what the terms were.
It's like one missile or something, right?
But
well,
yeah.
It's not just DNS, right? It's the actual like registration services for the .gov TLD, right?
Okay, so acting as the registrar for the .gov TLD, so hosting it,
and it's also the root DNS servers and everything else for it. But yes, it's the whole enchilada.
Yeah. So
I wonder if
7.2 is cheap, but yeah.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I just wonder if they feel like Cloudflare's distributed network with all the DDoS protection they have and everything else is actually stronger, given that these are all government domains, like government-based domains that are being registered, right? Because if you think about it, if you take out the DNS infrastructure of .gov, it affects a ton of critical infrastructure.
I mean,
around the world.
I feel a lot more confident that our government has Cloudflare behind them than Verisign. I can't imagine Verisign is too innovative on the back end and has the experience of Cloudflare fending off, massive DDoS attacks.
I would bet you're probably underestimating Verisign. I mean, for a long time, they had a monopoly on like SSL certificates and all the things that they had to put into place to make sure that those, like the root certificate authorities, weren't hacked for that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say they had a monopoly, but they were definitely the name in certificates for a long time. And then they also operate like 2 out of the whatever it is, 12 or 15 root name servers for the internet.
Gotcha.
So
that was
like they're not like
I take it
a fly by night.
They are. I think that they are a lot more. They keep their tech closer to the chest.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Which does a much better job kind of promoting their cool factor.
Agree.
So that's my this is my assertion, but which is
I would suspect that they have a pretty robust and sophisticated capability in DDoS and other security like attacks because of how long they've been around and the kind of work that they've been doing for a very long time. But for nonetheless, some reason it went to Cloudflare. So At that point, we can all agree on.
All right, so AWS has launched CDK Migrate and CloudFormation IAC Generator for infrastructure as code adoption. I'm guessing this is ClickOps to code, but by AWS. So, oh, look, yeah, ClickOps there. We go. And yeah, your mileage may vary. AWS also has released LLRT, a low latency runtime for JavaScript. It doesn't have 100% feature compatibility with Node.js, but if your app isn't affected, you get significant performance boost operating with it. You can take advantage of it today just by changing the engine for your Lambdas. Of course, test that first. All right, some self-promotion here. Might stoke some conversation as well, though. We got around to posting some internal docs we'd written previously to kind of convey to larger enterprises or companies earlier in their adoption of Terraform what a typical progression looks like. And it's so easy when you're just starting out with a new tool to oversimplify that or to not appreciate what it's going to take to operationalize it. And at each stage of this progression, at each stage of this journey, as it comes, for example, with Terraform, you kind of feel like, cool, nailed it, solved that problem. What do I want to do? Oh, crap. There's something else you got to do. So that's what this goes over. It's a history first from our perspective, kind of like how HCL has changed. And what's really interesting for me is like, I started with Terraform back in 2015-ish timeframe. And it was, first of all, very easy language I felt to get up and running with. It didn't have all of those crazy interpolations and loops and conditionals that we have now. And naively, one jumped straight into production with that. This is great. We need this. And we learned later on that wasn't going to work. So Terraform's evolved a lot. So now it's become somewhere more along the lines of a full-fledged language, but without the features you would expect of a full-fledged language, like a debugger. So this is kind of what also prompted my comment on, does Terraform need CDKTF or something? I'm not advocating that. I don't want that. But I believe that you can't just do vanilla Terraform. You do need some other tooling around it. And we draw these analogs or parallels with how, the success of many other similar tools ultimately led to other tools being created to make that more efficient. So, CSS is Sass, JavaScript is TypeScript, Docker is Docker Compose, and Kubernetes and ECS and Rancher and Nomad and 1,000 other players that jumped on top of that one. Helm has Helm charts and Helm files, or Helm chart. Kubernetes has Helm, and Helm has Helm files, right? So there's like abstractions on top of abstractions as you start doing these things more and more. So, I'm preaching to the choir with many of you here as more advanced Terraformers, but there are a lot of limitations that you encounter. So this post might be cathartic in the sense that you learned a lot of these lessons yourself, and if you ever need to convey it to others about why you're doing the things you're doing, you can kind of point to this and see it where you're at. You start with the simple Terraform code. You totally ignore how you're handling secrets, state, and hard coding everything, and then you start building out this root module, and you're literally just copying the resources over and over and over again because, well, everything starts simply. And then you realize, well, this whole environment that I copied 10 times, I should just stick that into a module. Okay, so now I have that module duplicated 10 times and the problems that come across with that. and the explosion of parameters like dev underscore cluster size, staging underscore cluster size, etc. All bad things. And then you start realizing, well, we didn't even need to write all those modules in the first place. Maybe we should have just used open source. But then you start using open source and you realize, crap, they're not maintaining that module anymore, or they didn't add that feature. And then you start realizing, well, that module was too big. So let's break our root modules into smaller root modules. But now we have more root modules and more parameters. How do we manage all those parameters? And those root modules we're writing are not reusable. So everyone writes their own root module. And that kind of also defeats the purpose of using modules. So it just keeps going and going and going and going until you reach Terraform bankruptcy. So if you're feeling any of these things, check out this doc and then read the bottom. Spoiler alert, we're Cloud Posse. We make Atmos. This is a pitch for Atmos. So we'll share that. Any questions on this or comments or thoughts?
That sounds like what you just described, the last 10 to 11 stages would be a pretty good class to publish online. There's a lot of folks that are looking to use Terraform and learning how to use Terraform. And yeah, I feel like that'd be a pretty good intro to how to use Terraform. And also for folks who are not familiar with Atmos, we could go through it and easily get value out of it too.
Yeah, especially if you find yourself, sorry, I gotta mute somebody here. There we go, somebody, thanks. Yeah, especially if you read through this and you identify with the pain points across your own journey, know that you're not alone, but also know that we did the same. So we pitch, we're presenting how we solved this ultimately with Atmos. This post doesn't go into those details. This is our documentation site for Atmos. So the whole site goes into that part. But yeah, you're right. This belongs as a separate post in different formats and mediums. For starters, we're going to promote this or pitch this with everyone's help. Okay.
I guess what you don't want to do, though, is scare people away from Terraform.
Yeah, this might be doing that. So
but what I mean is, like, especially for people who are trying to decide, say, between Terraform and Pulumi or something else, because I mean, a lot of these problems are not specific really to Terraform,
Yeah, I think one could substitute the word Terraform and maintain probably 90% accuracy of this with a lot of the other tooling, because what we really advocate are patterns for how to do infrastructure or implement architectures that are sustainable. And some of the same concepts that we've learned from service-oriented architectures apply to Terraform. And yet, when you see companies do Terraform, they're creating all these teraliths, these monolithic Terraform code bases.
I have two thoughts on this. One is, as I was reading this, because we posted it in Slack the other day, I was really identifying hard with every point. And it struck me, though, is there like a tutorial or something out there that can walk an entire newbie through, okay, this is how you might want to do this initially, but here's the pitfall. And then you might want to create this module yourself, but hey, here's why you should use an open source module. Because I feel like a lot of us have gone through the same thing, and it would be nice if we could avoid that for future people who are new to this and they can just skip through that whole process. So that was one thought that I had. And then the other one that I had was related to what you're saying, where you might be able to replace it with another tool and have 90% of it be still accurate. I wondered about that because part of me is wondering if I had a chance, would I do stuff with Terraform or would I just keep everything in Kubernetes? Like, I don't know that would solve these problems and I wouldn't have the same issues, but it's kind of really appealing to me to just ditch Terraform in a hypothetical brand new world if I had 48 hours a day instead of 24.
I've been doing a lot of the same kind of soul searching, and always have to keep an idea for what the future holds, because we want to remain relevant, of course, as a company long term. I identify with some of those. I'm not necessarily saying Kubernetes is the answer for that, but one of the interesting things with Kubernetes is that, I would be more inclined, if that were the case, if I were in this enterprise context where that's OPP, like, you can treat that as a constant that is there. You don't have to worry about how it got there, how it gets upgraded, how it's maintained, who responds to it, like, I want to eliminate all of those problems and the Terraform problem at the same time, because I don't think that we're going to continue, at least at this level, operating for, another 15 years. We're going to be operating at a higher level of abstraction. So the realization, one of the things that I'm grappling with, and I think this belongs more under as a Q&A topic almost, but let me go for like, so, there are all these very specialized tools coming out. There's for a long time, there's been EKS-CTL, which Amazon promptly adopted as their canonical way to manage EKS clusters on the command line. They didn't take Terraform, they didn't take CloudFormation, they support it in these other things, but much documentation refers to using EKS-CTL. I poo-pooed on that for a really long time. Like one tool to reign them all, it's going to be Terraform. And one of the common feedback we get from customers is, why are there so many tools? Why do I need this? Why do I need this? Why do I need this? And I'm empathetic to it. So, okay, well, let's keep reducing those tools. Let's keep reducing those tools. And we get to just using Terraform. And then Atmos, of course, because Terraform was not enough. And then we realized, crap, Terraform is really not that great at managing platform level things that we want to do. And this is where then, Terraform can do Kubernetes, and we use a lot of Terraform for Kubernetes, to be fair, but can't this still be simpler? So, then there's Argo CD and Flux and Helm and Customize and all these specialized things to do that better, that emphasize the developer experience. And then, if you haven't seen, this is worthy of its own announcement, is AWS Copilot. This is nothing new. It's been around. We've announced it previously on office hours, but it just drove home this point even more for me, because Copilot, if you look at Copilot, it gives you this convenient Heroku-like experience operating on AWS with AWS services, AWS pipelines, AWS ECS, AWS app, I can't keep them straight. One of their app platforms that they have. And handles, how do you handle environments, makes it all very easy. And then you look at Terraform and it's just like, yeah, this is maybe the wrong tool for the job. Same thing then and then you have Pulumi, which is obviously trying to solve all of this, but I think it works best at a high level. You have Amazon's SAM framework, serverless application model. Not too many companies would say that, would acknowledge that, yeah, Terraform was the best thing for doing serverless in AWS. I think anyone doing serious serverless in AWS is using some serverless framework. I'm saying all of this because I'm starting to see a pattern here, and I'm thinking that Terraform maybe belongs up to the platform, but not including the platform for certain companies, at least. Thoughts on that, anyone?
What do you mean by that? Like, what's your up to the platform?
So,
like, expand on that, because I think
yeah.
it's an interesting way of saying it.
Yeah. So let me bring up the conceptual model that I've used a lot over the years. Big picture.
While you're doing that, I'm just going to share my thought on this is that I think SAM, serverless framework, Copilot, EKS, Cuddle, the things that I really struggle with all of them is that they're just not backed by Git for the most part at the end of the day. Like they don't end up being infrastructure as code. They're this kind of like one-off, let me create a thing. And then, hey, who's managing that thing? Who has governance over it? You know, was it created using best practices? Like that ends up being a thing you have to document. You have to, you know, create process within your organization around. And I think that's the thing that it comes back to Terraform or some form of like actual thing that gets checked into Git is that I want that to always be the path to actually executing or creating infrastructure because it means there's management. It means there's a history of who did what, when, why. And that's like super important. And I think that people who aren't doing that usually end up with some form of mess on their hands. And maybe, yeah, you're bringing up probably more that I don't know, but and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so absolutely. So what you said is, I can't say that the specifics of what you said were accurate, but the sentiment of what you said are accurate. What we want is configuration backed by config files and deployable via strictly those config files. We don't want operations by command line argument, right? We don't want to have to know that you have to stitch together these 10 different command line arguments to perform a GitOps operation. Having learned from that in the AWS CLI, like AWS CLI is not infrastructure as code. That's infrastructure by command line. So AWS Copilot has command line options, but it is backed by configuration, which, and this is me sitting on an armchair postulating what architecture could look like using a Copilot, never done it, but just trying to study and learn and be current on the patterns. So it feels like using their simple command line, you can just run like something equivalent to Copilot up. It's not that, it's some other command, but that will then manifest this manifest. Now, just jumping back quickly to the 4 layers of infrastructure. So when I'm saying the platform layer, I've said this a million times, so I assume everyone knows it, but I know it's not news for everyone. It's news for some people. So the foundational infrastructure to us is the underpinning of your platform, your AWS organization, for example, your organizational units, your IAM model, permissions model, your network architecture, your DNS architecture, and that is pretty much it at that point. Obviously, all this, the usual best practices, CloudTrail, security, guard duty, inspector, may see, blah, blah, blah. But those not what application developers are interacting with on a regular basis. All right, moving up, platform, ECS, Lambda, Vercel, let's say S3 if you're using static page sites fronted by CloudFront, different kinds of platforms, targets where your artifacts get pushed and directly accessible by customers. So that's
and you're
the layer.
saying, but yeah, I don't know. You're saying, hey, it stops at after foundational infrastructure, and you think that tools should manage because, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird line, right? Like it's, yeah.
I say this feeling hypocritical. And this is my inner conflict right now, right? Because at Cloud Posse, we do these three layers predominantly in Terraform. We predominantly do infrastructure, predominantly do the platform, predominantly do shared services. When you get to the deployment and delivery of your applications, now we say, well, if you're using Lambda, use serverless, because really with Lambda, there's no platform to deploy. But with Kubernetes, there's a platform you have to deploy. With ECS, there's a platform you have to deploy prior to doing anything. With single page applications in S3 and CloudFront, there's a platform you have to deploy. So for some of those, EKS, for example, perhaps I don't know if EKS-CTL has come to this point where you can declaratively in a config specify exactly what you want, run one command, apply it, and it makes that happen, simplifying upgrades, simplifying, other things, add-ons, and etc. Anybody have experience with EKS-CTL currently? Can chime in on that? I would just be curious.
I don't have anything to add to that, but I do have an interesting observation, is that you drew this diagram in the way that you just described it, and you didn't have Terraform as a cross-cutting concern that goes across all of those things when you drew it. I know it wasn't intentional, but it's kind of interesting that that's the way the diagram is.
No, there is some deliberate. It's deliberate at the fourth layer. It's incidental because we didn't have better options that shared services or platform. Does that make sense? So like we use Terraform because there hasn't been a better, in our narrow worldview, whatever, there hasn't been a better option. But as I'm starting to see other options materialize, maybe that is a thing. I mean, aren't you saying that each strata here of this, or each layer could, logically be represented by a tool or set of tools?
I'm saying, no, I'm actually saying that today we use Terraform for layers 1, 2, and 3, like you said.
Yeah.
But in this diagram, unintentionally, you showed Terraform being contained within only the first layer.
What a foreshadowing. What a foreshadowing.
Yeah, so I'm saying, like, you've sort of now, like, if you look at the right-hand side of tool mapping, it's sort of mapped to what you're saying. It is saying, like, Helm and, like, Docker and all those things are best in the platform services, and Argo is best for doing deployments to Kubernetes, and Serverless is best for doing, like, Lambda things or whatever, So I'm just saying it sort of ended up that way.
It is
unintentionally
really interesting. Yeah.
I read that as Terraform, like there's a foundational automation of Terraform that needs to be done at that bottom layer so that you can actually execute on getting Helm applied to your cluster, or creating your cluster, or getting Argo initially bootstrapped into a cluster. But it is funny the way that I got you.
I would say that it's this additive approach, right? Like when you look at the price plan for a SaaS service, it includes everything in the basic plan. When you go to the pro plan, and enterprise includes everything in the pro plan. This is kind of saying like platform includes everything in the foundational infrastructure, and as a bonus, you get Helm, you get Docker, you get all these other things. But you're still using Terraform at layer 2 and moving on up. That's the reality of the current situation. But what everyone else has said here and chimed in is correct. Jonathan, Eunice, since you had your hand up first.
Oh, I just wanted to say I have used the EKS CTL. My first set of clusters came up with it because it's in the docs. It's the easy way to do it. It's terrible. It's very easy to bring the cluster up, but I mean the things that you said is it's not just a cluster. It's the SSO. It's the networking. It's the VPC. It's the having the CloudTrail audits. Your environment is a lot more than just your cluster. And if you use a tool like EKS CTL, you're going to always 100% of the time also need VPN CTL or AWS CLI or 57 other flavors. I struggle with many of the Terraform layers and complexities too. But I'm pretty happy with where we landed because at least in this world, it's committable to Git. It's a consistent whole system definition, and anything else that we have used or tried is not able to contain the full complexity of that environment. So as much as we may struggle with the complexity of the Terraform or the environment around or whatever, at least it is systematic.
It's it's a classic Pareto principle, the 80-20. And when you say it that way, you remind me, dude, we came from there. We used COPS back in the day in like 2015, 2014. And that's how you did Kubernetes. And then, it was magical when you just had COPS and you didn't have Terraform yet because you didn't know about Terraform. But then you start doing Terraform and you realize, how do you bridge those things? So identify with those problems you brought up there. And the 80-20 principle here is that you're going to get that cluster up 80% faster using EKS CTL, but you're going to spend 80% longer getting the last 20% done, trying to hack around the things that you couldn't do. So, Venkat.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with your comments on that base layer, on my team, we're doing something really similar where we, as part of that base layer, we actually provision Kubernetes. And then right after that, we're just doing Argo CD, and Argo CD is basically doing everything else. There are some exceptions when you want the CNI on top of Kubernetes, at least in the context of EKS. But Vault and all the other automations that we've built, we've basically got that orchestrated through Argo CD. So it's a really big Helm chart that just does a lot of stuff and has a lot of retries, as one might imagine. We're working on improving that, of course. But yeah, that's kind of the approach we've taken. Very similar to how you described it on the base layer. Yours is definitely more comprehensive on the multi-account strategy. We just plop into an account, roll out that cluster, and then get Argo CD as fast as we can in there, and then do the rest through Argo CD. And there are definitely times where Argo CD falls over, or the sync groups and all of that. If you've used Argo CD for a while, some of the caveats there, depending on runtime errors and all that. But we're slowly making progress on improving that. And once it's up and running, it's up and running for us.
This one, EKS Autopilot, right? Like they have GKE Autopilot, or I don't know exactly what it's called.
We are doing some stuff in GKE. We are actually using standard. I need to revisit Autopilot, but yeah. But same idea. Even across clouds, we're basically just using Terraform to get that cluster up and running, and doing basically what you described is other IAC equivalent tooling. In our case, we're using Argo CD and pointing that to our repo. And then we do actually go as far as managing some of the stuff that we have in those repos using the GitHub provider. So we actually dynamically generate manifests and stuff for Argo CD to fetch. So there's like some weird dependency chain. Hopefully we don't have a circular loop, but it's been working out okay so far. Definitely room for improvement.
Isaac.
Yeah, we're trying exactly what you described right now, and I heard about it, and I posted the link to the open source repo that is kind of championing that approach. I'm sure it's not new, and many of you probably already use it. But what I've discovered is, and this is one of my challenges with Terraform, for some reason, devs don't like it, but I'm finding that devs are willing to engage in K8s, Helm and Manifest, etc., but don't want to touch Terraform. I don't know why, but that's what I'm finding. And I'm finding that that's why I'm thinking maybe if I was to do this all over again, I would just do it purely in K8s, because for some reason devs want to touch K8s. And then I'll be able to hand things over to them and not have the platform team be involved in every single little thing.
Yeah, I think there's something there in what you said.
Yeah, in my particular use case for the developers that we're working with, they are primarily consuming from one very big Helm chart. So they don't use our Helm chart for Argo CD, but we have a more user-friendly Helm chart that we provide to them that accounts for a lot of different applications and situations. So we give them a lot of different patterns that they could easily copy and paste from. So it depends on how you're running your DevOps or platform culture, but that might be another approach, is rather than having them work in Terraform, could you give them a Helm chart that basically does all of that? And we found, so far at least, the folks that we're working with, they seem just fine working with a little bit of YAML, but Terraform, definitely agree with it's not, I've never been too successful on getting developers to write Terraform for things.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. And I'm not giving them the big things to do, not the main platform layer. But as you said, just that little bit of YAML, they're willing to play with that. But the same little bit of YAML in Terraform style, they don't want to touch it. Their brain shut down. And these are smart people. I don't get it, but it is what it is. I guess everyone is really familiar with YAML from Docker files and everything else, Docker Compose and everything.
Yeah. And I think the goal there is that Alex is kind of getting to some of the idea, but like, yeah, you should abstract away enough of your Terraform so that they don't need to think about it, and they're really just submitting the API request, you can think about it as, and maybe that's a YAML file, maybe that's a form that they fill out, but enabling them to run the Terraform without actually having to think like, oh yeah, this is Terraform is seems like it's the way to get people to get past that barrier, because it still is a really useful tool. It's just that, yeah, they don't want to add another language to their list of things they need to think about, or have that, you know, increased cognitive load type of thing going on. And yeah, it seems like it's a common thing with application engineers. They don't want to touch that. So
just to quickly add on to that, one thing that we've done on my team is we had a requirement with the current customer where they had a lot of CloudFront distributions that they needed. Having them do that through Terraform was quite cumbersome. It's slow when you get to the scale of hundreds that they're at. So what we did was for better or worse, we hand rolled their own operator, and they absolutely love it. And personally, I keep trying to get them off of this thing that we built because I don't want to maintain it. But here we are today.
Controllers for Kubernetes in AWS. There must be one for CloudFormation, no?
I believe there was, but there were some challenges that we ran into that at that scale. Basically, we ended up building our own and making a custom manifest for it. So we use meta controllers. So there's a lot of like tooling that you could use to simplify the development of a controller. The TLDR of meta controller, not to be a shill for it, is you just get a webhook with the resource, and you basically could write it in whatever language you want. You don't need to know Golang. I only know Python, and we're able to get one out the door very quickly within a couple of days. But the problem is now you have to re-implement all those features that you have. You have to like create that manifest. So we just used the Boda 3 library, and we got something out the door. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it really reduced the friction for them to get new websites out the door. It took close to an hour to sub 10 minutes for a fully production-ready website, and we basically just dug into their use case on like what they were doing to get apps out, and just took their feedback. So definitely recommend with your end users. I think it was Isaac who was talking earlier. Definitely recommend trying to figure out what their bottlenecks are, and then digging into those, and then trying to figure out how you can automate it. So essentially, it's more of a product for them versus having to use all these different tools. Like how do you just get them into like one way of using the platform that you and your team are building?
Yeah. All right. Let's pause there on that. Just a few more here to get through, and I think we're almost out of time for today. No Q&A, but let's see here. So one thing is this. Oh, I can't click on anything. There we go. No. Huh. Do you guys see my little crosshairs? You do see the crosshairs. Did I do something in Zoom that changed my cursor just to be a pointer instead?
I think there's a screenshot mode you might be in.
All right, 1 second. All right, share screen. All right, there we go. So we did post these updates on the Atmos documentation. A couple notable things I also wanted to point out, since there are a lot of users of Atmos, were some of the best practices now. Best practices specifically that we've learned, having worked with this so extensively, about how to, when to use templating and when not to use templating with Atmos stacks. We recommend that you try and avoid it as much as possible if you want really clean, easy to understand infrastructure. One of the things that we've struggled with is kind of under our own success with the tool, drying up configuration. That configuration actually can get too dry. And just like in real life, you develop rashes. When your skin is too dry, I think you can get complexity rashes when your configuration is too dry. Sure, it's elegant maybe, but not if anybody can't just look at it and understand. So avoid too many levels of imports. Balance dryness with clarity. Reserve code generation for your configuration, but avoid it in your components. Avoid it in your root modules. Because when you do programmatic generation of Terraform code, it's much harder to test it in an automated manner. It's more challenging to do things like Terra test when you're basically doing meta programming and it's morphing depending on the parameters, and the permutations are, impossible to solve for. And then the mix-in pattern for snippets of stack configuration. So we acknowledge that sometimes it is really convenient to have small stubs of configuration, but limit that to what we call these mix-ins for configuration that you can import to alter some behavior of a configuration in a deterministic way. Like, turn on logging, turn off logging. That could be a mix-in. So you don't have to know what it means to turn it on and off, but importing that configuration will automatically enable logging, provision the bucket, and do everything else you need for a sufficient logging of an ECS task, for example. On a similar note, we released the best practices for writing your Terraform components. Terraform components are your root modules. We have seen this done any number of ways. This is what we advocate just in general. So there's a lot of best practices guides out there for how to do best practices for child modules, so like Terraform modules. There's less guidance on how to architect the root modules. Maybe because the way people provision root modules with Terraform is very varied. Whether you're using Spacelift, Terraform Cloud, or similar, whether you're using TerraGrunt, whether you're using Atmos, or whether you're just using vanilla Terraform. So these are, I think, universally valuable, whether or not you use Atmos, but you will encounter a lot of those limitations of Terraform that I had in that other article if you start practicing these. So keep your components small to reduce the blast radius of changes. That goes without saying. So if your root module is very large, every time you change it, the potential impact is everything in that root module. How do you prevent that? Well, you make it smaller. What do you get when you make it smaller? It goes faster, and your cycle time from plan and apply goes up, so you can manage more infrastructure that way. If something goes wrong, it doesn't infect everything that was in that module. You're not holding up other teams. It's only holding up that one thing that you were trying to do. Split your, so how do you make them smaller? You split them up by life cycle. And the life cycle is like your VPC has a very different life cycle from your cluster, which is a different life cycle from your apps. You make them opinionated, but not so opinionated they can't be reused. So how do you do that? You expose parameters, but don't over parameterize them, because now you have something that's also hard to comprehend and test. So here's a big one that we see all the time. We make this mistake ourselves. If you look in our current reference architecture, there are areas where we still have this problem. The factory pattern is when you have a Terraform root module that will create N of something. So you need to create 5 AWS accounts. Sounds easy. I just pass my root module a list of 5 accounts. Create those for me, right? The problem is that that's hard to scale as the number of those factories in your factory, so to say, the number of those hammers that you're creating increases. We have this problem with accounts. So one of our warts in our solution is we have this account module that creates all of our accounts. But what if you're managing 500 accounts? Do you want a YAML file with 500 in there? No, you don't. So the problem is we created the factory in Terraform. You need to put the factory in your configuration so that your Terraform state doesn't grow and grow and grow and grow and become unwieldy. I'll pause there for a second. Anyone have opinions on that one way or another? All right. Well, I see there's so much more here. We're not going to get to it. We're at time. We got to be mindful of everyone's schedule and my own too. So we'll save the rest for another time. Thank you everyone for joining today. We are going to end office hours here. If you haven't yet subscribed to our office hours, join us at YouTube. Or if you want to find the recordings of our office hours, go to youtube.com/Cloud Posse. Again, youtube.com/Cloud Posse. If you want to subscribe to our office hours, go to cloudposse.com/office hours to subscribe. You'll get an invitation to your calendar. And if you're curious about working with Cloud Posse and if we can move the needle for you at your organization, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz, and answer a few quick questions, and you'll book a session with me directly. Thanks to you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next week. Take care.